Backrooms Fandom Group, Republic of Aurielle, Part 2. After the annexation of Sips, Persian reunification attempts ceased for a period of time. In 1961, Leo Minori was formed, a federative state valued to be a major foundation of contemporary Aurelianan hegemony and cultural practices. The nation witnessed Aureliano Creole transform into Aureliano and cemented the implantation of cultural symbols and tenets such as the usage of hound skulls or skulldog masks as adornments. Leo Minori is considered to be the Aurielle Golden Age, spanning from the inception of the group to the Sagittani Uprising and having significant influence outside of Leo Minori. Leo Minori technology, trade, and scientific innovation became prominent within the backrooms, gaining prestige and becoming an influential body within the levels they settled. Though the period was also characterized by Leo Minori Defoc's isolationism, as they participated in very few collaboratory missions. The 1962 Cultural Revolution gave rise to a stylized art known as Struvenism. In place of the general dark composition of paintings that dominated most of the year, Struvenism sought to represent peace, beauty, and randomness. Paintings in the Struvenist style sought to show the beauty within randomness often experienced in the backrooms. The efforts of Laurine Palem led to the popularization of the movement, which later developed into styles such as Arvos Nosum, Kolkanism, and Paleno. The Auriellan Golden Age would end in late 1966 with the small province in level 427 verdant wildscapes known as Sagittan seeking and declaring independence, experiencing an exponential rise in hypernationalism, cause of which is unknown, although it is believed to be caused by radicalization of the youth from previous members of the Unbound Explorers Coalition in prior years. The governor of the province held an illegal referendum which laid the groundwork for their rebellion. Leo Minori retained a defense and guard force, although it was largely unfit for conflicts due to ideological focus and research orientation. Loyalists to Leo Minori within Sagittan were the first to respond to the province's separation, responding with a cordon around the exits of level 427 while the government mobilized the defense force. During the Sagittani Uprising, the Leo Minori Defense Force, LMSDF, employed human wave tactics and skirmishing to exhaust the enemy. As fighting stalled to a deadlock, the tactic was largely useless, but was still being employed. Increased allocation of guardsmen to fight in the Sagittani Uprising left many colonies undefended and thus subject to both human and entity attacks, resulting in the collapse of the group. A day before the collapse of the capital, deployed forces were ordered to retreat, though checkpoints were established at the exits. Sagittan subsequently declared victory, and the Sagittani state was formed, which would later be renamed Antlia. Istauran Federation. The Minister of Military Affairs formed a rump state within the remaining colonies of Leo Minori named the Istauran Federation after Leo Minori's collapse. Under the leadership of the Istauran Federal State Council, the state military junta, Istara would manifest their destiny through a set of military campaigns against competing states that emerged from Leo Minori's collapse. Mandatory military service was established under directive of the IFSC. The Federation's expansionism brought heightened tensions. During the Moran conflict, the Federation decided to participate to increase its territory and resources, during which a coalition was formed and led by various groups that opposed Istara's expansionism. Coalition forces would engage in ferocious battles against the Istauran Federal Army, managing to push it back and annex major cities. Istera remained on the defensive up until a botched counteroffensive called the Grand Istauran Blunder caused a collapse of the front lines and subsequent surrender. Other issues, such as instability and morale, were attributed to Istera's defeat. Istauran leadership managed to avoid capture and the Moran trials. They relocated to the Backrooms colonists under new aliases and became part of an expeditionary team that would later set up a base in level 479. Abrupt communication failure between the base and Central Command, among other factors, led to the base's abandonment. Arisa and Vistokan Wars. Arisa was established in level 339 on the modern-day lands of Volacris. They trace back to the collapse of Minori, originally having different goals. Though after Istauran leadership arrived there and won the elections, they set out to reunite the remaining descendant colonies of Minori, thus perpetrating the Vistokan Wars. In 1969, Arisa declared war on Spica and Recula, subsequently executing a lightning invasion of the two, annexing both of them, before any military intervention occurred. After the fall of Spica and Recula, various other descendants of Minori began remilitarizing, and some declared war on each other to grow their influence to deter an Arisan invasion. After war with Spica and Recula ended, Arisa declared war on Pisca. The Piscatan campaign lasted around 4 months. Initial resistance from the Piscatan army was heavy, but was quickly worn down by Arisan blitzkrieg tactics as they tried to replicate the quick fighting seen on Spica and Recula. Scavenged cars with added armor from levels saw their first usage, though their logistical burden and fuel consumption meant limited usage. When Arisa attacked, they were confronted by the informally known Wall of Kespetin, a set of heavily defended fortifications within level 416 Terra Sequoia and level 16 J. Berry Mental Asylum, the levels where the group's two most important bases were located, created during Minori times. The defenses from the Wall of Kespetin managed to hold off Arisan offensive attempts, though Arisa had settled on sieging those bases while reserve forces continued their advances elsewhere, entrenching them in hardline attritional warfare as defenders had to make do with their limited equipment. The campaign lasted longer than expected, as the combat experienced was rather nomadic. Most units spent time searching and locating Piscatan bases rather than fighting. Nonetheless, after military advisors dictated that all bases of Pisca had been either conquered or abandoned, plans for a breach of the Kespetin walls were made. It was relatively easy to breach the fortifications in level 16 due to the scarcity of naturally occurring resources, which resulted in starvation and low resistance of enemy forces. Though fighting in level 416 was harder than anticipated, Arisan military advisors convinced head commanders to do an extreme, albeit considered necessary, step for reunification procedure, which was burning down the forests of level 416. This event came to be known as Apollo's Reign. The decision was reasoned as, quote-unquote, destroying enemy morale. The plan worked, though not before burning large portions of controlled territory. After the Piscatan campaign, Arisa began a general reconstruction of occupied territory to ensure no civilians would be incentivized to rebel against their occupiers. The local populace was given a steady supply of essential necessities while also being given reconstruction bonds, especially in areas affected by Apollo's reign. Arisa also called for the construction of better roads and settlements, though this period of peace was short-lived as 3 groups, Altair, Neos, and Losfiar, would form an alliance and preemptively strike Arisa. The initial strike was successful. However, it would quickly subdue to a bloody stalemate. Both sides, deeply entrenched in their bases and the would-be front lines, became silent except for the occasional firefight. However, this stalemate lasted for several months until 1970, when Alioth began a mobilization of troops and launched an invasion into Lustferite and Alterran bases. The majority of Lustferite, Alterran, and Niotian forces were preoccupied with defending bases closest to Arisa. Thus, Alioth was able to conquer various bases without much resistance, as the Alterran main base, Ulgai, fell to the Alioth. Remaining forces would split their troops. Coinciding with this split, Arisa launched a complete offensive on fortified positions, aiming to meet up with Alioth for the possibility of a collaboration, which they successfully did so a few weeks later. Any remaining enemy forces were either met by a two-sided attack or were flanked and destroyed. After the campaign's conclusion, Arisa and Alioth decided to open formal diplomatic relations and military cooperation, creating the Sidus. A military alliance was established to make future conquests considerably easier. Initial Sidus activities were primarily focused on the pacifications of newly occupied territory, following which Arisa and Alioth set their sights on Circia, Skosva, and various other smaller groups. These groups would be invaded and annexed easily by the Sidus. The only one spared from an invasion was Cruz Sortona, which became an honorary member due to its importance as a religious hub for Christianity. Many of these territories would be reorganized as civilian or industrial grounds, although some became heavily militarized. Shortly after these conquests, Seducian forces shifted their focus towards bigger targets. Leaders of Arisa and Alioth elected Hadira and Antares, as they had been engaging in a conflict for the past year, and after successfully conquering them, they would move towards other larger targets. The first Seducian invasion of the two groups began in 1971. The 1st, 3rd, and 17th Shock Company launched an attack on several Hadiran colonies located in level 156 Starlit Cinema, where they cut all communication with more important bases to stop a Hadiran response. Plans to attack Antaran bases were ordered, however, they were quickly halted as Antares contacted the groups to join Sidus. Despite some within Arisa High Command being adamant about the idea, unanimous agreement by Alioth, Cruz Sortona, and the remaining Arisan leaders led to Antares officially joining. Antares quickly relocated some troops to fight alongside other Seducian forces. Despite weakening their front lines with these additional troops, Sidus wasted no time and launched a complete incursion into Hadira. With Hadira now rerouting forces to stop Seducian advances, a repetition of the Alterran campaign occurred. Antares began an offensive throughout the less defended areas of Hadira, encircling important locations. Meanwhile, the full momentum of the Seducian invasion continued as they made great advances, practically cutting through the heart of Hadira. By mid-1971, Hadira grew desperate. A large amount of Hadiran forces were thrown against the Seducian forces to cease their advances. Although some were mildly successful, they were not enough to impede their capitulation on August 9, 1971. As the Hadiran campaign ended, the apparent threat of Sidus caused the remaining groups to brief about the possibility of an alliance to counter them. Talks would continue. The alliance was planned to encompass all remaining groups, though these talks would be intercepted and only cause Sidus members to fuel their expansionist ambitions. As a direct response to them, Antares proposed the attack of Era and Valnatak, the main two groups leading the efforts. Though the plan was shelved, as Arisa and other members opted for the reconstruction and pacification of occupied territory, the plan transformed into Operation Hocus Pocus. Operation Hocus Pocus was enacted on and set out to cause popularity for the ruling party to drastically fall and unrest to increase and to then set up a pro-Sidus government in Valnatak. The Antarians, with support from other Sidus members, began a series of internal sabotages and in political disruptions that would subsequently lead to a 7-day schism that ultimately ended in men in unmarked uniforms setting up a new government and appointing a new leader. The newly appointed leadership remained largely unpopular in its inception, though that changed as Sidus secretly allocated various resources for them to use to weigh in public support. By late 1972, Valnatak held a referendum, which caused it to join Sidus. With the securement of Valnatak, Sidus decided to do its final and most ambitious campaign to end the Vistokan Wars, a campaign against all remaining groups, which later would form the Lepus Security Alliance, LSA, as a response to the attacks. By January 26, 1973, all members of Sidus had organized their armies and were prepared for war. Beginning in February 12th, various companies and battalions began advancing towards Lanaken, Sofari, Mustakan, and Rodinan colonies that were located far from important bases, thus making control and requests for help significantly harder. The units received an order to commence their incursion on February 14th, marking the beginning of the campaign. In the weeks following, Sidus made continuous attacks against the smaller, isolated colonies of the groups, transforming them into bases of operation for future attacks. With High Command dictating that enough isolated settlements had been conquered, they began planning for a full-force attack on important bases on all of the groups. These plans were acted upon in May 11th when the Moten Hadiran Brigade, 81st Light Infantry Company, and 2nd Battalion made a push for the Lanaken major colony of Normare, where they engaged in a period of lengthy and stagnant combat. A surprise came when, as a response to the attacks of Normare, Lanake would spearhead the formation of the LSA between Sofer, Lanake, and Mustak, which were part of the initial attack, alongside 4 others that weren't, though were willing to cooperate with them to repel a Seducian invasion. The formation of the LSA caused Sidus member leaders to officially declare a full-scale invasion. They ordered forces to seize as much territory and bases as possible before enemy combatants arrived or could form a proper defensive line. By July 2nd, Sidus had creeped dangerously close to various bases in Sofar and Lanake, managing to successfully capture Normare. Onward, the war grew to become a stagnant and bloody conflict of attritional warfare, with neither side making significant gains. By October 6, seeing nearly no progress being made in the campaign as anticipated, Sidus members would decide to begin targeting LSA leadership and their internal stability. Operation Boomstick would initiate on October 1st, in which various Antaran and Arisan spies would infiltrate the populace of the LSA, where they were instructed to perpetrate various political assassinations and fund uprisings of sympathizer and collaborator groups. In spite of these efforts, the overwhelming LSA forces led to the reconquest of various bases, closing the gap dangerously within controlled territory and the bases of Arisa and Eliath. However, control over important territories such as Nomare were held for the duration of the war. The LSA finally launched a full counteroffensive, which was spearheaded by the 2nd Sofari Elite Republican Guard and backed up by many other battalions and brigades. With overwhelming numbers, the LSA made a landfall into Seducian lands while also sieging various strongholds that had been set up in occupied lands. Due to the landfall, Sidus members relocated more funds into Operation Boomstick and also began usage of car bombs and psychological warfare, with strategies revolving around deteriorating morale and war support by killing as many enemy forces as possible. The counteroffensive quickly grew stale as LSA troops had to deal with ambushes and bloody confrontations. By January 21st, Agents operating in Lanake successfully assassinated the Lanaken leader, leading to a Sidus-sponsored armed insurrection that attempted to seize leadership, which ended up escalating into a civil war. Response of LSA was sluggish, though 2 LSA members did manage to send in reserves to assist loyalist forces. Namely, Antlia and Sagittan are the same group, though in a referendum, they chose to change their name as they deemed Sagittan was imposed by their occupiers. And Ikaz, seeing the initiation of the Civil War as an opportunity to open another front, Arisa, Alioth, and Antares rerouted 4 battalions to assist rebel forces. These forces quickly moved through Lanaken lands, seizing governmental institutions and setting up a puppet government. Not wanting to replicate the mistake of prior groups, the LSA did not reroute forces to try and recapture Lanake, but rather instead chose to fund organizations against the occupation to keep them preoccupied while they continued their offensive attempts. Arisan intelligence intercepted one of these transactions and established various mock organizations that would gain funding from the LSA, which would later redirect to Sidus or the puppet government. Sidus would use the acquired funding and resources against the LSA due to their lack of military response. They began an incursion into LSA territory, invading Era, Sofar, and Mustak, with the majority of LSA troops focused on their landfall into Sidus. Seduction forces met with little resistance, and by May, they had successfully flanked and encircled a majority of LSA troops. Encircled troops would attempt unruly breakthroughs to end said encirclement out of desperation, but were widely unsuccessful. June brought about the end of any troops within the encirclement as the Sidus launched a complete offensive to eliminate them. After the fall, Sidus launched an offensive to capture all of the LSA. Panic erupted among the populations of groups within the LSA as Arisan, Alioth, and Antaran forces quickly advanced through their territory. Forces that had been stuck deep would finally see their siege lifted as the Mustakan front collapsed. The collapse of the Mustakan front only foreshadowed the fall of other LSA member states. Sidus swiftly annexed Sofar and Era. By August, a majority of LSA members either capitulated or were annexed, with Antlia and Libra remaining the only independent remnants. Sidus, specifically Arisa and Antares, emphasized battle doctrine on Antlia and Libra and placed great emphasis on an assured victory. Thus, they commonly practiced indiscriminate artillery barrages. Libra and Antlia experienced devastation throughout their colonies and bases. The devastation would be enough to lead a Libran capitulation, leaving only Antlia. Sidus launched one final offensive that caused the annexation of Antlia, subsequently marking the complete end of the Vistokan Wars on November 12th. Post-Vistokan Wars. The regions most affected by the Vistokan Wars were those controlled by LSA states. Immediately after the end of the war, Sidus reorganized annexed territories and began an extensive reconstruction effort alongside integration efforts. Simultaneously, Sidus put the Inisartis Comus Feudorel Common Federation Initiative, which set out to unify all its member states, into action with the preparatory agency for the Common Federation. To set forth the ambitions, numerous acts such as government and economic standardization, interchange programs, and more began. On 27th January 1975, the governments passed the Common Unity Act, forming the Republic of Aurielle. It incorporated every Sidus member state and ensured equal autonomy for all comprising states. A provisional government was put in place for state building and democratic transition.